In this video, we're going to cover normalization again. And at the beginning of this course, we covered the normalization of the cable raw data table. And I said the best way to look at this would be a manager or someone giving you a Excel file or some type of spreadsheet file that is rather unorganized, doesn't follow any rules of normalization, just has a bunch of data, and you need to load it into the database again in the most optimal way possible. So what we did, just as a refresher, is we went through this table and found out which columns were repeating. Another great way to think of this is which columns would I put in a drop-down box versus having a free text entry form or maybe a date drop-down. And dates are a little different. But what we came up with was the station table and the genre table obviously have repeating values and a limited number of repeating values. So we would want to separate those into what we call lookup tables. And these lookup tables, if we go over to the genre table, has a genre ID which is just randomly assigned. Again, that genre ID is the primary key and it's auto-incremented. And we also have the name, and one by one we copied a few of them over from raw cable data, again, unique values, over to genre. We did the same thing for station, where we copied over a few of those names and had random IDs assigned. Then finally, we went to the listing table and created this table, again, according to the diagram. We created the table, and then we created foreign keys, remember relations, from the listing table station ID to the station ID station table, and from the genre ID to the genre ID genre table. And really what this meant was, if I insert a value into the station ID table for the station ID column of the listing table, it has to already exist in the station table station ID. Same thing for genre. And really what that comes down to is my choices for genre are 1, 2, and 3. I can't go to listing and say we're now going with genre 99. It'll throw me an error. And please make sure when you do get errors that you actually read them over. There's a lot of good information in these errors. But it tells me specifically we're violating that foreign key constraint that points to the genre ID. So I'm going to hit discard. As you can see here, it changes it back to a 1. Now, we did this manually and copied the data over, constantly going back and forth. You know, if we were to fill in all the rows here, I believe there's 14 rows, we would have to copy each one and then constantly look up genre over here to get the number, and we'd have to have all the values, and we'd have to have station here and have all those values. So we can insert into the listing table the station ID, the genre ID, and the other columns from that cable raw listing. However, this kind of becomes physically impossible or inaccurate very quickly once you get too many rows. Again, if this was TV Guide, we wouldn't have 14 rows in this raw data table. We would have thousands or hundreds of thousands, and copy and paste is not an option. So there is an automated way to normalize these tables once we've created them, to copy the data over and make it completely accurate. And here's what we do. And please follow this along. You will be using this table in future assignments. First off, I'm going to delete from the listing, the genre, and the station table. We're not removing the table. If we were removing the table, it's actually called drop. We would drop the table. All we're doing is deleting the data inside of the table. So if I delete from listing, and I go to that listing table, and I go to content and hit refresh, all the data is gone. So I'm going to do the same thing for genre and station, and it has to be done in this order, meaning listing has to come first, then genre, then station. And then I'm just going to check the tables just to make sure that they are blank, which they are. Okay. The next thing I want to do is populate the genre table. And we learned we can do a select with distinct, an aggregate function, to get all of the unique values. So if I highlight just that portion, you'll see here I get action, adventure, horror, all the way down to sci-fi. Now, if I want to take these and insert or copy them into that genre table, genre name, I'll just surround my select in parentheses. I'm only selecting one column, so I can only insert into one column, but that's okay because the genre ID here is auto-incremented. We don't need to insert there. If I run this, it'll say 8 rows executed. Great, let's go check it out. And here are all our unique values. By the way, the fact that your genre ID here doesn't start at 1 doesn't matter. I know developers who will come in and reset that to 10,000 just so they have large numbers to work with. As long as the number is unique and that action adventure or horror only appear once, meaning if I go and look up 7 for genre ID, I'm only going to get sports. I'm not going to go ahead and see multiple 7s in here, or there's not multiple sports relating to different numbers. Everything's going to be fine. So right now, just make sure that the genre ID is unique, and it has to be because that is a primary key. So once I do that to the genre table, I can do the exact same thing to the station table. I can say, let's select the distinct station from raw cable data, and this gives us all of those distinct values. Now, if I modify it with a insert into select from, it says 11 rows affected. Let's go look at that station table. And there are all of the unique stations we have. Okay, so far we've taken care of 2 of the 3 tables. We have the station table populated, we have the genre table populated. What we need to do now is get the listing table populated. And I will say this is the most complex step in normalization, so please pay attention. What I need to do, I'm going to write this by hand, is I need to select, and if I look at the listing table, well, there's listing ID, but listing ID is a primary key and it's auto-incremented, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to start off with saying I need the listing name, the station ID, the genre ID, and the premiere date. And we'll just leave that here. And again, I've been working in SQL 20 years. This is how I will start writing a select statement. I will figure out what columns I need. So these are the ones I need. Let's just verify they're the same. Premiere date. Yep. Again, we're not doing listing ID. Okay, so to insert into here, these are the columns I need. Now let's figure out what tables I need. Well, listing name, if I look at cable raw data, over here I called it show name. Even though the names are different, it really don't make a difference. That's where I want that to go. So I'm going to select from the cable raw data table. I'll say from cable raw data. And that, instead of doing listing name here, I'm going to go ahead and make this show name. And that will get us the show name and the premiere date from that table. There's the premiere date and there's the show name. However, I want to select the station ID and the genre ID. First, let's just do station ID. I don't have a station ID. If I look at this table, I have a station. Well, we know because we just inserted into it that over in the station table is the station ID. So I know I need to join in the station table. Now here's the weird part. This is a little different. In order to go ahead and bring the station table in, I need to join it to the cable raw data. But if I look at these 2 tables, there is no station ID in cable raw data, but there's a station. During normalization, this is the only time I will join on the name fields as opposed to the ID fields. So here, I essentially want to take ABC, go over to station, look up ABC, say it's 4, and access the 4. So how I do that is I need to join it on those name fields. So I'm going to say station name is equal to cable raw data dot station. Again, the names are slightly different, but those are just labels. It has the exact same data. This says ABC, CBS, AMC. This has ABC, CBS, AMC. The names are kind of just labels. They're irrelevant. Well, they're relevant to the syntax. Well, so now we have the show name, the station ID, and the premiere date. We need to get genre ID. Well, we need to do the exact same thing. We need to say, let's join the genre table on genre.genre name. If I look at genre, we need to get the genre ID, but we have the name here. But if I look over in cable raw data, we got all that from this column, genre. So I can join it over here to equal to genre. Now, when I run this, I'm getting this data. Make sure it matches up. Go to the table we're going to be inserting into, like location, and say, okay, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., got a 4, a premiere date. See how it matches up, not location, listing, to these 4 columns? Well, now, this is the easy part. I can go ahead, sorry for the jumping on that, and surround this in parentheses. And now I say insert into listing, but now I need to list the columns from the listing table. So where should show name go? We said it was going to go into the listing name. So here I'll say listing name. Station ID is going to go into station ID. Genre ID is going to go into genre ID. And premiere date is going to premiere date. Again, these are the columns from the listing table. These are the columns from these 3 tables. You can always run your select first, and I recommend always writing it first so you can run it, see the results, and ensure that this code is working properly. Now I know these lines, if we get an error, the error is not here. It's got to be up inside of here. But if I run this now, let's check the listing table, hit refresh, and there are all of the stations and genre IDs in place. And that took less than 0.2 of a second. Again, that was only, what, 14 columns? But if I was running this for TV Guide or Bright House or Time Warner, we could run the same thing for 1 million rows, for 10 million rows, and it would go ahead and normalize those tables. So again, this is something we're going to have in the next few labs. So make sure you understand this process, and make sure you go over this part of the normalization where you selected distinct for the lookup tables. Again, those are the tables with 2 columns, an ID and a varchar or some type of name. And then we join them all together. And this is the only place where we join columns on their names as opposed to their IDs in order to get their IDs.